Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Instagram Manifesto workshop, How to Feel Better About Using Instagram. For those of you who are new here, my name is Nicola, and I am an Instagram strategist who works with writers and authors to show you how you can use Instagram to get more readers for your work. I've been using Instagram since early 2015, first to promote a blog, then as a social media manager for small businesses. And in the last 2 years, I've been working with over 100 writers and authors, some who've been platform building for the purpose of securing a book deal, others who are building momentum on Instagram for the launch of their books, and still others whose books are already out in the world, but who want to bring some fresh energy to their book promotion. And in my work with writers and authors, I often hear different versions of the same barriers to using Instagram to finding your readers. And those barriers tend to fall into two categories: practical barriers like what to post, when to post, how to make reels, how to grow your following, and that kind of thing. But also, the second category are more emotional or kind of psychological barriers that mean you get stuck in your own head and find it difficult to show up to promote your book. I sometimes find it helpful to think of those two categories as skills versus philosophy. And this workshop is going to dig into the philosophy of how you can use Instagram. Because for a lot of writers and authors, the way Instagram feels is often the first and biggest barrier to you using it. If you are interested in learning more about the kind of skill category of problem, so you want to know more about the kinds of tactics and strategies that you can use on Instagram, I do have other services, resources, and workshops for that. But I will tell you more about that at the end of the video rather than taking up time now. So if you're interested, just hang around at the end to learn more about those services. So, my philosophy for Instagram is what I call community first. That means that while we don't ignore the demands of the algorithms and the platform's appetite for content completely, because we do have to sometimes play the game a little bit with Instagram in order to get anywhere with it. Otherwise, what's the point if we're not going to get anywhere? We don't prioritize the demands of the algorithms and the platform's appetite for content. In my approach, what we prioritize is using Instagram to find and connect with our ideal readers rather than growing a massive following. We prioritize using Instagram in a way that fits alongside the other demands in our lives, excuse me, rather than burning ourselves out trying to do everything we think we're supposed to do. And we also prioritize using Instagram in a way that aligns with our values. So I don't ask people to do things that feel like you're crossing a boundary of some sort. So the purpose of this workshop is that by the end of it, what I want you to understand is that using Instagram to promote your book doesn't have to feel as uncomfortable and difficult as it may currently do. It doesn't have to feel like a chore or a drag. And by prioritizing the three things that I've just mentioned, it can actually become a productive, sustainable, and effective place for you to show up and promote your work. To be clear, though, before we begin, while I do advocate for using Instagram as a way to find your readers, I'm really not an apologist for Instagram. I do hold this tension between the more nefarious aspects of the platform versus how it can support the careers of writers very much constantly near the surface of my teaching and guidance. So I'm not an evangelist. I'm not going to tell you everything is perfect here. And yet, despite its downsides, I do think that Instagram can still be a powerful driver of reach for authors and your ideas and your books. And honestly, one of my favorite parts about my work with writers and authors is showing you how it's possible to use the tools Instagram provides while subverting its its dominant cultures. That's why I've created this workshopy talk to invite you to develop your own manifesto for Instagram, where you set the rules you want to follow rather than unquestioningly and uncomfortably following the rules Instagram sets for you. So, welcome to the workshop. It's going to be a lot of me talking interspersed with some questions for you to think about or write notes about or consider. And you can either pause at any point to answer those questions, or you can watch the video all the way through and then come back to the questions. How you access this workshop is completely up to you. It's going to be a non-linear examination of this complex interplay between your life, your emotions, your desire to reach more readers, and what Instagram wants. But what you can expect is to deepen your awareness of how Instagram currently acts on your life and how you can seed something more generative. That is how you can set yourself up to use Instagram in a way that means it works for you and not the other way around. So there are two halves to the workshop that cover two things. Writers often tell me cause you difficulties. There is a third area that very often crops up, which is around the relationship between Instagram and our time. And I am currently creating another workshop a little bit like this one that's going to deal with that. But for today, what I want to focus on is two, probably what is success on Instagram, and number two, how might you deal with some of the tricky feelings that crop up when you are using Instagram. Now, your responses to these questions will probably overlap because very often our feelings about Instagram are kind of interconnected with our ideas of what success looks like. So if thoughts or reflections occur to you about one when we're supposed to be thinking about the other, please blur those boundaries and respond in whatever way feels right to you. There is no one correct way to engage with this workshop. So with no further ado, let's begin. I wonder how many of you started your relationship with Instagram with a version of the question, what should I post? And it's a legitimate question. I'm not saying it's the wrong question to ask. It is a legitimate question because to build your own audience, you do need to post content. And coming up with ideas for those posts can be a significant obstacle for some writers and authors. But to flatten your relationship with Instagram to this question alone really encourages us to focus on what the platform wants from you rather than what you want from it. So rather than starting with a question about what you are going to do for Instagram, I want to start with an exploration about what you want Instagram to do for you. And to help us get there, I want to first unpack how Instagram often tries to tell us how we should, in quotes, be using it. So first of all, let's think about what are the shoulds that you carry around about what showing up on Instagram should look like. And these may be different for each of you, but I've got a slide here that I'm going to switch over and share with you with some of the most common ones that come up. So just give me a moment to switch over and share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can now see a list of writing. These are some of the shoulds that people very often tell me they experience when they think about how they're showing up on Instagram. So for example, that you should look a certain way, that you should make videos, that you should post every day, that you should dance or lip sync or be funny in your posts. You have to be doing those things. That you should be comfortable in front of camera, that you should tell your followers about your book in every single post that you put out into the world, that you should behave like you're in competition with other writers, authors, or accounts, that you should post at the right time of day, assuming that's a thing, that you should join in with trends and as many trends as possible, that you should go viral, otherwise you're failing. What's the point in showing up at all if you're not going viral? That you should move fast, be the brightest and the loudest, the first and the best always, that only those people are the people who can access Instagram and access Instagram's opportunities, and that you should achieve a certain number of followers or likes or views in order for your presence to be legitimized. Or is it something else for you? Feel free to pause the video here to take a couple of minutes to write down what comes up for you. Or you can continue watching and thinking as we go. Because I now want you to invite you to look at your list of shoulds and think about how you experience them and how you might challenge them. Because these shoulds are not rules. I'm going to say more about that in a moment. We feel them in our bodies as though we're rules, and we're breaking the rules if we don't do those things. And then the breaking of the rules makes us not want to show up because we feel like we're doing it wrong. But actually, they are not rules. Like I said, I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, can you identify why you feel like you should be doing these things that you've just listed down? And to break that question up a little bit more, who told you, either explicitly or implicitly, that that's what you should be doing on Instagram? Where did that message come from? Are they someone or something you should be outsourcing that judgment to about what you should and should not be doing? And also, whose agenda is that person or thing serving? Are they serving your agenda for being on Instagram or someone else's? And we'll dig into a little bit in a moment. We'll dig in a little bit more into this idea of what your agenda is. But it's worth just sort of thinking about it. Whose agenda do these shoulds serve? A follow-up question: what might these shoulds tell us about the dominant culture of Instagram? Another way of thinking about this might be to name the dominant culture as influencer culture, because that is usually what most people think of when they think about showing up on Instagram. They think about the way in which influencers show up, and actually, are there other cultures available? Is this the only culture available to us, or are there other ways of showing up, other movements to be part of, rather than just influencer culture? What do you fear will happen if you resist the shoulds? What is the potential cost? Because if you don't do things the way Instagram is pushing you towards doing them, what might that mean for your Instagram account and your Instagram presence and the effectiveness of showing up on Instagram for you? And also, just like, how legitimate are the shoulds? How legitimate is the culture that they are part of? And how legitimate are the fears? Because that last question in particular might encourage us to start thinking, as we will in a moment, about alternatives to those shoulds. And again, you can pause to note down your thoughts or continue watching. I realize these might be quite involved questions for some of you, or for others of you, you might just whiz through them. If you're stuck, keep going, keep watching. Maybe thoughts will sort of loosen up as we dig into this a little bit more. But every time I show a slide like this, please assume you may want to pause the video until you are ready to move on. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. One of the reasons why I want you to write down or think of some ideas around how you experience these shoulds is because I want to challenge the idea that these shoulds are legitimate. Some of them may be harder to find alternatives to than others, but it's important not to just accept the norm unquestioningly. I hope many of you are critical thinkers in other areas of your life, and it's important to be just as invested in critical thinking when we are engaging with platforms like Instagram. Because, I'm sure you already understand that in general, shoulds in kind of wider life exist to keep us living in a way that suits a broader system. So, for example, when you think about the shoulds that are ascribed to women or men, we can see that many of them are about upholding a system that relies on women and men playing a particular role. So the shoulds are in service of a system, but they're usually socially prescribed rules rather than hard and fast laws, which means while they may be someone's truth, so they're not exactly lies, they're not the truth. And that in turn means it's entirely possible to challenge, subvert, bypass altogether these shoulds in order to show up in a way that feels more whole and aligned with your own values. However, as some of you might already have identified, bypassing or subverting these norms is likely to come with a cost, just as it does when we do that in real life, because not performing the shoulds as Meta may like us to may mean you don't succeed on Instagram. So, what I next want to do is to consider what we mean when we think about success on Instagram, and perhaps even start to seed the beginnings of an alternative to that definition of success. So once again, I'm going to share with you some prompts and questions for you to consider. So first of all, how is success measured on Instagram? When we think about success on Instagram, whose metrics are we using? Whose agenda do those metrics serve? When we prioritize these kinds of metrics, what happens to our relationship with our art or our ideas? What happens if you don't prioritize those metrics? And what alternatives are there or might there be to those metrics? The alternatives may look different depending on you, your priorities, how you want to show up, but there will be alternatives to the prescribed metrics that may not currently be serving you. So feel free, once again, to pause the video, have a think, write some notes, keep watching, whatever suits you. I am going to continue with this thought around alternatives to the prescribed metrics that Instagram wants us to believe are the primary metrics that we should be using. What other ways could we measure and define success? Here are two perspectives that might help germinate an alternative definition and understanding of what success can look like. The top one here is actually not from Instagram, it's actually from Substack, because although we like to think of Substack, well, some of us like to think of Substack as being a totally different place. I'm not convinced it is, especially with the arrival of notes. It's become much more social media adjacent. And I think that a lot of the baggage that we felt was weighing us down on the other social media platforms, a lot of us are actually bringing over to Substack. And, the way in which we're defining success, we're bringing the old way of defining success with us. So here's an alternative perspective. You hit publish, nobody likes, comments, or shares. I mean, under Instagram's definition of success, that would mean you just failed. But Lizzie Mulherin here suggests something else. But what if someone read it and felt less alone? What if it sparked their next big idea? You don't always see the ripples your words create keep writing anyway. So there's a slightly different view on what success might look like. The second quotation here is from a writer who I work with one-to-one, who wrote her own manifesto as part of our work together last year. She has told me that having it written down so she can refer back to it when she starts to get sucked into Instagram's way of doing things has been really useful for her, because she wants to use Instagram as a repository or portfolio for her ideas and her process. And so she speaks of her presence on Instagram as being about the potential for audience. So this is what she's actually written down in her manifesto. It is the potential for audience, not the actual quantifiable audience, that is the appeal to sharing my work on Instagram. So she's not interested in the numbers. She's interested in the potential for audience. The chance that I might touch or move a single person who reads my words and nods knowingly, or feels that leap in their chest when they realize I've just articulated a feeling that's been scratching at their brain like the stiff label on the inside of a t-shirt. That is what she's hoping for when she posts about her ideas and thoughts and work on Instagram. She's not looking for kind of like the short-term superficial hit of likes or new followers, but what might often be an invisible but longer lasting, more meaningful impact. And she's kind of arrived at peace with the idea that she might not always know it is happening. But it's what she wants her work on Instagram to do. So when she feels herself being sucked back into Meta's priorities, she returns to her manifesto to remind her of what really matters to her. And that's not to say that she doesn't value growing her following at all, or receiving comments about her work, or finding new readers for her work. It's just that she has chosen not to use those things to validate her work. Validation is not what she's on Instagram for. She's on Instagram for the potential to find an audience. So I wonder, do those perspectives make you want to add anything to your responses to the questions on the previous slide, on this slide? If they do, please feel free to pause the video and then restart it when you're ready to move on. So I'm back. My big face should be back. Okay, so as we're moving in this non-linear way through this exploration of how we use and relate to Instagram, I now want to take a sideways step to a different but related set of reflections, which I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago when I was talking about what is your agenda for being on Instagram versus what is Instagram's agenda for you. Because I now want you to consider what you want to achieve with your presence on Instagram. Now, you might be thinking, duh, the answer's obvious. I'm using Instagram to sell more copies of my book, or maybe it's to build an audience for my book in order to eventually sell them copies of it. And I get it. Okay, so that's what we're encouraged, that ultimate kind of aim is what we're encouraged to frame as Instagram as being for. But can I suggest that framing Instagram in this transactional way, where we think about what we can get from people via Instagram, is actually going to make using it pretty sticky and uncomfortable for most of you, for most writers and authors and artists. That kind of dynamic is usually a fairly tricky one. Now, the world we live in does encourage us to see one another as resources to be extracted from. And as writers, I imagine many of you have experienced how mainstream productivity and success culture disrupts your creativity. And if those mainstream narratives around productivity and how we define success affect your creativity, is it also possible that using an extractive model of what can I get from this person to inform your use of Instagram is also going to feel quite sticky and unappealing too? And if things feel sticky and unappealing, you're less likely to do them. And if you don't do them, it's definitely not going to work. So rather than thinking in that transactional way, I wonder what would happen if you started to think more relationally. So the question of getting more readers for my book becomes a byproduct of the time you spend on Instagram rather than your sole purpose. So if you're not going to frame your purpose as sell more books, what else could your purpose be? That is the next question that I want us to dig into. So we're talking about that in terms of what is our purpose for being on Instagram. But first of all, because you're all writers and authors and you're either working on books or you have books that you are getting ready to promote, or you have a book that's already out in the world, let's take a step back from Instagram and consider the relationship between you, your book, and your reader. So again, I'm going to show you a slide with some more questions on it that are going to help us answer the question, what is your purpose for being on Instagram? The way I phrased it earlier is kind of like, what is your agenda for being on Instagram? And the way we're going to get there is via thinking about your book. I'll explain the link between the two in a moment. So first of all, I want you to dig into the idea, why have you written or are you writing your book? What is the, writing a book is a huge undertaking, and, very, very small numbers of books make people rich. So I know it's not for the money, and very, very few authors become famous. So I know it's not for the fame. So what is driving you to do this really difficult thing and write your book? And also a second question is, what will your reader get from reading your book? How might they benefit from reading your book? Now, fiction writers sometimes find this question a little bit more difficult than nonfiction writers, where the benefit of reading a nonfiction book might be more obvious. But fiction, does a job. It does something for people. So I don't want you to skip over this question if you are a fiction writer. I have got some slides, some examples for you. This is a non-exhaustive list of examples of how of what people might get from reading your book and how will they benefit. But it might just help loosen up some of your own ideas. So take any of these that work for you or come up with your own. So for example, I want people to fill in the blank when they read my book. Do you want them to be entertained or amused? Do you want them to think about or even answer big questions? If that is one of your things, then what are the questions that you want them to think about or answer or be able to answer by the time they've finished reading your book? Do you want people to feel supported, or advised or guided? If they are experiencing or have experienced something specific, which you will know what that is because that's what your book is about. Do you want people to feel like they're being offered a path forward or hope, perhaps, if they are experiencing or have experienced a particular situation? Do you want people to feel seen or heard or understood? Is the story you're telling one that has kind of been pushed to the side or kept in the shadows? Is it about something that is relatively taboo? And therefore, reading your book might help people feel seen, heard, and understood, like they're not alone. Do you want people to feel connected with you and one another over shared experiences or interests? Please be specific about what those shared experiences or interests might be. Or do you want to have your readers join in with a conversation about particular ideas. So again, please pause the video to give your time to make notes, or keep watching, because once you've thought about what you want people to get from your book and how you want people to benefit from reading your book, I then want you to think about, how will you know if you have done what you set out to do with your book? What data, not in the loosest sense of the word, not necessarily numbers, it could be any kind of just information. What data can you collect that will tell you if you've done what you set out to do with your book? What observations might you make that tells you that? Because although I'm suggesting you don't prioritize numbers of followers or likes or views on Instagram, goals themselves, wanting to achieve something, is not the enemy here. Goals can actually be really generative and motivational. And as Kerry Jarvis once said to me, you are allowed to want things. So look up Kerry if that sounds like something you'd be interested in being given permission to have. So goals can be generative and motivational as long as they are meaningful to you. And if you've written a whole book because you're so passionate about the subject matter or the story, then, having that book land in the hands of readers so they can feel a particular way and benefit from it in a particular way is a goal that is meaningful. So don't feel like you're not allowed to want things. You are. It's just, let's adjust our lens and reframe what it is you are wanting. Essentially, how is it that you're going to measure the success of your book? Because of course, you could choose to measure it by the number of copies it sells, which is the chosen metric for the marketplace, but is it yours? You could choose to look for the data of readers getting in touch. That might be via social media or in person at events or via email, and bringing their thoughts and responses to you that tell you that your book has done the thing you set out to do. Or it could be another source of data if you have one in mind. But the point is, what will you be looking for to determine whether your book has achieved the purpose you set out for it to achieve? And the reason why I want you to consider this is because hidden in the purpose of your book is also the purpose of your Instagram account. So getting clear about the purpose of your book can also guide and inform how you show up on Instagram in this relational rather than transactional way that I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. So what I mean is, why you have written your book is the same reason why you are on Instagram. What your reader will get from reading your book is the same as what you give them through your Instagram account and your content. What you hope readers will feel when they read your book is the same as what you aim to make them feel through your Instagram posts. So take what you're thinking about your book and the purpose of your book, and that becomes the purpose of your Instagram. So rather than the purpose of your Instagram being sell my book, it becomes more relational. So for example, if you've written your book to ask big questions, how might you explore those big questions through your Instagram? If you want people to feel comforted when they read your book, how might you comfort them using your Instagram content? And if you want to invite people into a conversation about something that means a lot to you, how could you use your Instagram posts to do that? I won't continue because I'm sure you can start to, you understand the point that I'm making about how the purpose of your book and the purpose of your Instagram content should be the same purpose. So the question becomes not how do I get people to buy my book, or how do I grow a massive Instagram following so all these people buy my book, but rather how can I connect with each individual potential reader? What difference can I make to them when I'm posting something? What is the purpose of my Instagram? Not Instagram as a whole, not the way in which other people are using Instagram, but my personal Instagram. And how can I tell that I'm meeting that purpose? Um, Working through those questions is how you can get closer to, or even arrive at, a definition of what success will look like for you on Instagram that has very little to do with the metrics that Instagram tells us are the important things. So you're starting to reframe Instagram and its place in your life in a more aligned way and a more individual way that works for you. So that brings us to the first part, to the end of the first part of the workshop, where you've interrogated the shoulds that Instagram would like you to believe are the way you have to use the platform, and you've challenged how success is defined. If you haven't yet arrived at a firm feeling of what your alternatives might be to the dominant culture of Instagram, that's absolutely okay. It can take a little bit of time to marinate in those questions, and there's no rush, but hopefully something is stirring. And while it continues to stir, let's move into the second half of the workshop, where we're going to examine some of the ways Instagram makes some of us, all of us, at some point feel, and how to navigate or even counter some of those feelings. So, some of the most common feelings that writers tell me are provoked by time spent on Instagram include comparison or inadequacy or dissatisfaction with your life, or equally as common is feeling like you are self-involved, egotistical, or maybe even needy for showing up on Instagram and talking about this thing that you've done and you want people to know about. Some or all of those might resonate with you, or you might have some different feelings. So if you want to pause the video to note them down, please do go ahead. I am going to concentrate on these two groups. So comparison, inadequacy, and dissatisfaction, or sort of self-involvement, being egotistical or seen as needy. In this next part of the workshop, but you might have other things that are coming up for you as well. And, I encourage you to write those down, because some of the questions that I go on to ask might even be relevant to those other feelings. It's just not the way I've articulated it. It could well be that you're just articulating it differently. So before we move on, I do want to acknowledge that some of these feelings might kind of already exist in us for reasons outside of Instagram. So rather than being a cause of those feelings, Instagram becomes an amplifier. But regardless of whether Instagram is the cause or the amplifier, they are really uncomfortable feelings. And there are things that you can do to mitigate the effects of these feelings on you using some of Instagram's tools that might have passed you by. And this is especially relevant if feelings like comparison, inadequacy, or dissatisfaction are the ones that come up for you. Give me a second. I need to take a swig of water. So, some of the tools that Instagram has made available to us and are very often overlooked when we're sort of caught up in this daily spiral of the way in which we use Instagram. When I tell writers to do these things, they go, "Oh yeah, I forgot that I could do that. So I didn't want to leave this out in case you've also sort of forgotten that these are things that you can do." Or even perhaps you need to be given, you feel like you need to be given some sort of permission, like, oh, I didn't know it was okay to do these things. So some of them might be to unfollow or mute accounts that regularly make you feel a bit rubbish. You might not want to unfollow if they're if it's somebody who you know, because you don't want to make things awkward, or if it's a smaller account and they might notice if you unfollow. You might not want to unfollow, in which case you can mute those accounts and stop their content showing up in your feed. So if you recognize that there are accounts that regularly make you feel a bit rubbish, this is your permission slip to unfollow them or mute them. You can also use the not interested function for suggested posts, because nowadays our feed is very often full of posts from accounts that we don't follow, but around subject matters that Instagram believes we're interested in. And sometimes it can be those posts that really make us feel dissatisfied with our lives or inadequate in some way. So you can use the not interested function, which will then tell the algorithm, you might have to do it a few times, but it will tell the algorithm, do not show me any more posts like this. And you can find that in the menu that appears in the top corner of every single post, and it's signaled by the 3 dots icon. Tap on there and it will give you the option to click not interested. So go ahead, do that. Taking it one step further, you can also turn off suggested posts altogether. There is the option to do that lasts 30 days at a time, and will mean you only see posts from accounts you follow in your home feed. And you can choose that by tapping on the Instagram icon in the top left-hand corner of your home or Reels screen and selecting the option you want to see, because there's 2 options usually there, which is to see accounts that you follow or to see favorited accounts only in your feed. Something else that people very often kind of don't realize can be really impactful is being very mindful what you're giving your attention to when you're online, because the algorithms can't tell the difference between positive and negative attention. They just see you giving something your attention by stopping to watch or read it, even if you don't like or comment on it, and then it will give you more of that kind of content. So just be mindful of what you are engaging with. And failing all else, Instagram does now have a pretty nuclear option of completely resetting your algorithm and starting again. And you can find that in your settings. Do be aware, if you choose to use that until you retrain your algorithm to show you what you want to see, it may send you some pretty strange stuff. So get busy with that not interested button, and make sure you are interacting with the things you do want to see, in order to train the algorithm to show you more of that stuff. But the broader point I want you to understand is that you don't have to subject yourself to the whims of Meta's algorithms. No medals are awarded for habitually exposing yourself to content that makes you feel a bit crap. And you are allowed to curate your feed and take control of what it shows you. So now let's take a look at addressing these other set of feelings of being self-centered, egotistical, or needy, if you use Instagram to promote your work. What can you do about those feelings? So I'm just going to share my screen again with some more prompts on it. So if using Instagram makes you feel gross in some way, perhaps you feel self-centered or egotistical, what can you do about it? Well, perhaps it would be useful to bring some of those feelings out of the dark and get curious about what the story underneath those feelings might be. Maybe think about, well, whose judgments are they? Are they yours or are they someone else's? Do they belong to an individual, perhaps even someone in your past life, or is it the judgment of society you fear? The kind of pervasive ideas we have internalized that tell us about what we're allowed to do or be, or the goals we're allowed to have, the ambitions we're allowed to have, the things we're allowed to desire for ourselves. And who do those judgments and kind of internalized narratives, whether they're from individuals or from wider society, who do they serve? Because they're not serving you. So, one quotation that I would like you to consider is a quotation from writer Mona Altahawi that she wrote in her book Headscarves and Hymens While the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. And she wrote, "The most subversive thing a woman can do is to talk about her life as if it matters." Because women and men are taught, as girls and boys, that women should be palatable and tolerable. Women are not supposed to take up space or have loud or strong opinions, are not allowed to own their own expertise or talk about talents or achievements. If women do those things, then they are fair game to be ridiculed or challenged, scorned, insulted, or even attacked. That is the kind of narrative that our cultures have about the place of women. And it might go some way, if you're a woman, it might go some way to explaining why showing up on Instagram can feel so deeply uncomfortable for many women, and why being more visible and taking up space and owning your expertise can feel like you're stripping off a layer of skin. You know, you're not doing anything that is crossing your own boundaries in terms of your privacy. You're just talking about your expertise, perhaps, but it still feels incredibly vulnerability inducing because women are not supposed to do these things. You're not supposed to take up this much space, apparently. Sorry, let me just, I jumped ahead a little bit too fast then. If you're not a woman watching this, another way of explaining what is happening when you feel gross about promoting your books that is not woman specific is anti-capitalist business coach Bear Hebbert's view, which in the video that I'm going to show you in a second. Hopefully you will be able to hear the sound on this video. If you can't, there are captions. And if you want to watch the video with sound, I will include a link to it in the notes that accompany the video you're watching now, the workshop video. There will be notes underneath where I will link to this particular video, because I think it's a really interesting framing of why we very often feel so uncomfortable with showing up on Instagram to market our work. So let me just play that video and see what you think. Now, if you're not into that thought, if you don't sort of identify as with sort of anti-capitalist thoughts or philosophies or beliefs, on a more personal level, you might consider looking at these feelings from a different perspective. So when you see someone else talking about something they have achieved or an experience they have had, what do you think of them? I'm assuming you spend at least some time scrolling through Instagram, looking at the content from other people. Are you judging them as harshly as you are judging yourself? If you are thinking positive things about them, why are you assuming they're not going to do the same for you? If you catch yourself thinking negative things, why is that? Where are those feelings coming from? Is that evidence of some internalized narrative about who is allowed to show up and say certain kinds of things, about what people are allowed to say about their achievements? Here in the UK especially, we are culturally conditioned to be highly suspicious. This might not be the case for if you're watching this from a different country, but we certainly are culturally conditioned to be highly suspicious of anyone giving it big licks. But is that suspicion always fair? Is it possible to make more generous assumptions about the people who will see you talking about your work? And that phrase, generous assumptions, again, I would like to give the credit to Kerry Jarvis, who I mentioned earlier in the talk, because that is a phrase that she introduced me to. And is it possible that other people might not be thinking about you as much as you are? As devastating as that might be, it can also be liberating. So some questions for you to think on. You can pause the video or you can continue watching as we move into the final part of the workshop. Because as well as considering those questions, it can also be useful to keep some kind of practical ballast in our back pockets to counteract the weight of some of the ways we feel about showing up online. What I mean by that is, if you feel like marketing is self-indulgent, make it a point to participate in your marketing by talking about other people and other books or other creative work that you admire as part of your content. Share your platform with other people as a counterbalance to any kind of suspicion that you might have that your marketing is just being self-indulgent and selfish. Do the opposite then. And bonus points if the work that you share from other people in some way aligns with your own work, as that's kind of like a soft signal to people what they can also expect from you. And if you feel like it's egotistical or needy to talk about your work, go back to your purpose as we defined it earlier in this session, the purpose of your book, and therefore the purpose of your Instagram. Because how will reading your book serve readers? And how can you serve potential readers through your Instagram content? If you are doing things, not all of the time, but at least some of the time, that is going to be useful and of value to other people, then how can it be that using Instagram is egotistical or selfish or needy? You're doing things that are beneficial to other people. So that just doesn't add up. The maths isn't mathing. And a final way to combat some of these more negative feelings that spending time online can provoke is something that I think gets overlooked a lot of the time. We get so wrapped up in the negative feelings, the negative cycle of showing up on Instagram and the way that can make us feel, that we forget that actually you can use it in a way that feels good, that makes you feel good. So when you're thinking about how you're going to use the platform or what you're going to post about, as part of your decision making, ask yourself, what is fun for me? What makes me feel excited? What am I interested in? What brings me joy? And how can I bring more of that into my use of Instagram? Because if I'm talking about things that are fun for me to talk about, that might counterbalance some of the negativity that I feel around showing up on Instagram. Now, I've got 3 examples of writers to show you who are finding their fun in very different ways. I don't want you to look at these as like rule books to follow as to what your fun should look like. That's ridiculous. We all find different things fun. But I just want to show you these to make you aware of the basically infinite spectrum of possibility when we think about, okay, well, what is fun for different people and how are different people showing up in ways that are fun for them. May not be fun for you. You may look at some of this and think, sounds horrendous. But have a look at them and just see what your response to it is. So I'm just going to once again share my screen because I've got these 3 writers to show you. The first writer I want to show you is a writer called Hayley Dunlop, who is a romance novelist. And Hayley's book that is coming out this year is set at Christmas. So she talks often about Christmas. She loves Christmas movies anyway. I have spoken to Hayley in the past, and she's told me that this kind of Christmas movies thing that she does before Christmas is something she would be doing anyway. So it's kind of just like a marriage made in heaven in terms of her book. She also, this is really quite random, very niche. She also posts about hand dryers. So much does she talk about hand dryers and the pleasure that hand dryers in different places bring her, that people now send her pictures of hand dryers. She loves music, live music and gigs, so she posts often about those. And also, she's a writer. She loves writing. She loves books. So she posts about those things. This is how she finds the fun in her content. And as a result of posting about things that she finds fun, there is an infectious energy and enthusiasm behind her content that probably makes it easier for her to keep showing up, and also really draws you in as a user of the platform. I don't read romance novels. It's not a genre that I've experimented much with. I really feel like I need to, but I haven't yet. And yet I still absolutely love following Hayley, and I share her stuff because I know there are people in my audience who do love romance and who are writing romance and who are reading romance. So, even though I'm not going to buy her book, I am going to help kind of amplify and signal boost her book. So it's worth her having me along for the ride. And it's her energy and enthusiasm and the sense of fun in her content that really brings me in. The second example of finding the fun is a writer called Abby Jimenez, who again is a commercial fiction writer. I think a lot of her books would be classed as romance as well. But very little of her content is actually about her book. She does talk about them, as you can see here, but a lot of her content is actually about her family and her dogs. Her dogs, I mean, she makes them funny. The dogs are just dogs, right? But she makes them funny with the way she posts about them. And she creates videos that are funny and, kind of just uplifting, I suppose, in the same way that her books are. So in a way, they are aligned. She's very online. I think at the last count, she's running 4 different Instagram accounts. And I know that she's also big on TikTok. Like her dogs are TikTok famous, which is all down to her. Don't think the dogs are making the videos. So she's very online. So I'm not suggesting that you go to these lengths, but I just wanted to show you her account because she so clearly takes pleasure and joy in the kind of content that she is creating. And it does bring her readers for her books. And then the final writer I wanted to show you is Daisy Buchanan, because for the last launch for her last novel, Pity Party, Daisy got really creative with her video content. There was costumes, there was scripts, there was miming. It was, there were kind of like mock interviews. It was really fun and really excellent. And for her, really throwing herself into the creative side of putting together launch posts for her new book helped her stay motivated. She actually wrote a Substack essay, which again, I will link to in the notes, about this campaign that she put together for herself, for her own Instagram account, and how she'd forgotten that it could be fun. And putting together this content meant that she wanted to show up. She was having fun creating the content. So there are 3 examples of different writers showing up on Instagram fun for themselves, because at least some of the time, if you're going to show up on Instagram with any degree of sustainability and consistency, you need to build in opportunities to do what pleases you, and to hell with what Instagram likes. Because I really believe that when Instagram ultimately is about humans. And when you imbue your Instagram content with energy and enthusiasm, because you're talking about something you are genuinely passionate about, not only is that more fun and therefore more sustainable for you, but people do respond to it. They will be drawn to it. So please have a think about when you're feeling down about your Instagram content. Well, how can you make it fun for you? What are the things that you just love talking about? And that brings us to the end of this talky workshop, this workshopy talk. And I hope you found it useful. I hope you maybe have pages of notes, or perhaps your thoughts are buzzing and your eyes have been opened to an alternative way of using Instagram that doesn't have to feel horrible. If you would like to get in touch to tell me what you thought, please feel free to email me on nicola@toomuchsocial.com. And also feel free to share this workshop with your network wherever you hang out online. People can access it for themselves by signing up for free to my newsletter. So please share away. And if you would like to get more practical advice, because this, as I said at the beginning, this workshop was much more about the kind of philosophy around how we show up on Instagram and make it just feel better, the way we feel about showing up on Instagram. But if you would like to get more kind of like practical advice and guidance about using Instagram, please check out the Too Much Instagram membership, which I host on Substack. If you're watching this talk, that means you are already signed up to the free tier of my newsletter on Substack. To become a member, what you need to do is upgrade your subscription to the paid tier, which costs £12 a month or £120 a year. You can sign up for the whole year and get a slight discount. In the accompanying notes for this video, there is a link to more details about what you get when you join the membership. It's a lovely community of writers and authors who are all facing in the same direction. We're all trying to use Instagram to promote our work and find more readers and get better at that and more effective at that and more strategic at that. And kind of just being very lovely and supportive of one another at the same time. So do come and have a look at that if you think that might be useful for you. If you're feeling more positive now about kind of being on Instagram, but perhaps a specific issue that you have is coming up with ideas for your Instagram account, another thing I would like to tell you about is a workshop I'm going to be running in February. The Spark workshop is all about generating content ideas, and some of the writers and authors who have attended the workshop in the past have told me that through the workshop in 90 minutes, they have generated months worth. I mean, one writer told me she generated 9 months worth of content ideas that are relevant to your ideal readers. So look out for more information about that. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, if Instagram and time management are an issue for you, stick around on my mailing list, which if you're watching this, you are already on, because I'm soon going to release a talky workshop, a bit like this one, to give you some pointers for navigating that particular challenge, because I know that along with the 2 challenges about success and the way Instagram makes us feel, that time is another big challenge for a lot of writers and authors. So that brings this workshop to a close today. Thank you so much for joining me here. And I will see you soon, maybe on Instagram. Bye.